From West Virginia Public Broadcasting. J, A Rockefeller's Journey, is presented with financial assistance from the West Virginia Humanities Council.
Music is a huge part of my life. I spend at least an hour to an hour and a half every single day listening to Johann Sebastian Bach. If you serve in public life, you need something that grounds you, that puts things in perspective, which is just sheer beauty, which is not about Republicans and Democrats fighting each other. I started listening to music when I was about 6, and I started piano lessons when I was about 8, and I kept them up through college. And I tend to like masses and oratorios and things that have to do with the death of Jesus Christ and the mourning of that. It's something that touches your soul, something that's so beautiful that it takes the breath out of you, and it's haunting, and it stays with you forever. It makes me a better person.
Why would an heir to one of the nation's largest family fortunes, familiar and comfortable in the most elite circles, come to one of the poorest states in the nation and stay?
I think that I was meant to do this. I think this is what I was always meant to do.
J. Rockefeller will choose his own and unexpected path into public service and public office. He'll go from Harvard student to Peace Corps volunteer to social worker in West Virginia. He'll go from the West Virginia House of Delegates to the Secretary of State's office, from college president to governor, and from the governor's office to 3 decades in the United States Senate.
I love the Senate. I love the Senate. I love the intensity of the work, the gravity of the issues. I love fighting for West Virginia here. I don't know of anything more honorable, more satisfying than helping people. But there's a lot of downside to it. Exhaustion, failure.
He's a friend of the people. He's been through different trials and tribulations, may I say, that prove that he's really a friend of not only the black people, but all people.
He will say he learns experientially, and he'll take with him the heartbreak and frustration he experiences, first as a student in a foreign country, and later as a Vista social worker, living among the poor who lack jobs, health care, quality education, and often workers' rights. He'll take these experiences of social injustice all the way to the nation's capital, where he'll be an instrumental force in passing landmark legislation.
Make no mistake about it. This has come about because a humble person who has been relentless in his admirable desire to stand up for those in need, said he was going to go to bat for this program every step of the way.
It's why I don't consider being in elective office or being in the governorship or the Senate as a job. I consider it as a privilege, an opportunity to do things.
We're looking at a narrative that could not be written about in fiction. We're looking at someone from one of the most famous and maybe infamous families in American history, one of the most wealthiest families, one who has been raised in an environment that West Virginia is not even on the fringe. And yet he will end up coming to West Virginia. He will end up staying in West Virginia. He will end up working for West Virginia in a career that will span almost 50 years. That's an amazing story. That's an amazing legacy.
Autumn 1957. The United States is experiencing its most prosperous time in decades. The Korean War is over, Dwight Eisenhower is in the White House, and in a dorm room in one of the most elite Ivy League colleges resides an heir to one of the nation's largest family fortunes, amassed by one of its most ruthless industrial titans. The young man is 6 feet 6 inches tall and will inherit millions. But in many ways he feels uncomfortable, unfulfilled, even stymied, like his father and to a greater extent, his father's father.
He was unhappy in his life a lot. And one of the problems that I saw in my grandfather and to some extent in my father was that they couldn't break free to be themselves until they were in their late 40s and 50s. But I saw that, and I was determined that was not going to happen to me.
John Rockefeller, nicknamed Jay, the great-grandson of John Davison Rockefeller, is born June 18, 1937, in New York City, just 3 weeks after the death of John D. Sr. At the turn of the 20th century, John D. is considered the most hated man in America, a reputation remembered to this day by the public and his family. As co-founder of Standard Oil Company, John D. is despised for controlling up to 99% of the country's oil refining business by unapologetically crushing mom-and-pop refineries through a brilliantly organized monopoly.
He was obviously a phenomenal business person, phenomenal and creative, grasping for more and more money. That was the way things were then. There were no rules and regulations. President Teddy Roosevelt finally passed the Sherman antitrust law. He divided the Standard Oil Company into 13 different companies, all of which my great-grandfather had huge amounts of stock in, right? So it just made him richer. It was still a good act, but I've always been struck by the irony of that.
John D. becomes a billionaire and possibly the richest man in the world. His wealth ensures unmatched opportunities for generations of descendants, including a life of opulence at the secluded, secure, sprawling family estate he built in Pocantico Hills, New York. This is where Jay visits his grandfather during the Great Depression, accompanied by his sisters, Sandra, 2 years older, and Hope, 11 months younger. When the country enters World War II, Rockefeller's father moves the family to Washington, D.C., where he serves as a Navy lieutenant commander. The youngest child, Elida, is born in 1948. Less than a year later, Jay is sent away to boarding school to exclusive Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire.
I was 12 years old. I was too young to go to prep school. I'd grown so much. I was already huge when I was in elementary school. So back in those days, if you were tall, they just advanced you a grade. That's a bad thing to do, especially to a young male, if you go into your class at least a year younger than everybody else. That's one of the reasons I'm not that much of a socializer, and I'm a little bit of an introvert.
The national economy is now booming. Rockefeller graduates Exeter and moves right on to Harvard, with most assuming the great-grandson will one day head one of the Rockefeller family enterprises.
Why did I go to Harvard? Because virtually everybody in my class at Exeter went to Harvard. But I didn't like Harvard, and it was at the middle of the 50s, end of the 50s. People were just satisfied. People weren't driven to talk about interesting and difficult things or other people's problems.
Then comes Jay's junior year and a defining moment.
I was elected president of a very elite social club, which meant that I would have to spend my senior year convincing through black-tie dinners Harvard students to join the Fly Club. Had my own office, I had a rope that I could pull, and somebody in a white coat would come up and say, "What would you like?" After 3 weeks, I went to the person that I felt closest to at Harvard, Dr. Ed Reischauer, and I said, "Get me out of here, fast. I don't want to become what I think I will become unless I go contrary to what's going on in life now around here." I wanted out. And within, I think, 3 weeks or so, I was in Japan. I knew I had to make a break in order to begin to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do, and I wanted it to be worthy.
J. Rockefeller's career path will surprise his parents, and his journey will be unlike that of any other Rockefeller of his generation. Throughout, he will remain profoundly influenced and motivated by Rockefeller family legacy and by family history. Other Rockefellers of his generation are influenced too.
It's interesting that all of the women in my generation in the Rockefeller family, and there are many more women than men, they have all, including all three of my sisters, when they were in their teens, they dropped their last name of Rockefeller. It was just not a good name to have. It put many impediments into their relationships at school and elsewhere. And so they dropped it. And to this day, none of them have taken it back.
It's important to note the complexity of the Rockefeller patriarch and how some characteristics of John Davison Sr. can be seen threaded throughout succeeding generations of Rockefellers. While he boasted of his business prowess, John D. Sr. was a staunch Baptist who frowned on notoriety and frivolous and decadent living.
Then you immediately go to the son, and the son said, "I was born in wealth and I couldn't do anything about it. But the question is, what do you do with wealth?" And what he did with wealth was start giving it away, philanthropy. The next generation is into service with the two uncles who are governor. And then that leads us to Jay's generation, what they call the cousins. This amazing fourth generation is still Rockefellers, still extremely one of the largest family fortunes in America. Where are they going to go? And it seems that they part. Some of them reject it during the 60s and go away, and some of them, like Jay, embrace it. But what they're embracing here is service. I have wealth, I have power, I'm going to do something for my country, for my nation.
Really, I think it's a matter of just feeling that public service is the area in which the most can be done, and that the opportunity to help America, or a small part of it, is the greatest in public service, and therefore, for me, it's the most exciting career.
Although he is the great-grandson, John Rockefeller, the Harvard student, is not John D. Rockefeller IV. While rejecting a life of leisure the family dynasty can afford him, he requests the patriarch's name.
My birth certificate says John Rockefeller, to spare me from the John D. Rockefeller IV thing. But the fact of the matter is, I'm very proud of the name. I wrote my grandfather, John D. Rockefeller Jr., and I asked him for permission to change my name to John D. Rockefeller IV, because in a way, that increased the pressure on me to do good, to live up to this, awesome name and do good.
So many people in the Rockefeller family would end up trying to run away or hide from. And what he's really doing is he's going right to the source and embracing it. And I think that says something about his character. It says something about his ambition, something about what he wants to do with the Rockefeller name. By adopting the great-grandfather's name, he said, I'm not doing PR here. I'm not running away from this. It was a very striking action by a young man at 21.
And the letter that my grandfather wrote me is absolutely beautiful.
What did he say?
That you're obviously very proud of our family, you want to do good, and that makes it very easy for me to give you permission. Did I need his permission? In my mind, I did.
At the time, John III, working closely with Jay's mother, Blanchette, runs the Rockefeller Foundation. Jay's father also heads the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and organizes first-of-their-kind national commissions on philanthropy. He manages all Rockefeller medical research and public health programs. He also establishes the Population Council, helps build the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City, and sets up the United Negro College Fund. These are just a few of Jay's parents' philanthropies and passions.
They worked hard. They were very strict Baptists. It wasn't a touchy-feely type family. To be honest, if I wanted to see my father in our home, I had to make an appointment to go see him in his study, as did my sisters, my 3 sisters. It was a formal house. When we had important friends of my father to dinner, we were sent upstairs to eat upstairs, because you don't mix those two things. And that hurt a little bit. But the main thing was that he worked, and he worked really, really hard. And so did my mother. It was harder those days for women to work. She found ways. She was president of the Museum of Modern Art. She did all kinds of things.
Your younger sister was quoted many years ago saying, "My father and mother's greatest fear was that their 4 children might take their wealth for granted and grow up spoiled and arrogant."
Spot on. She's exactly right. And unfortunately, it's worked out in the cases of some of my generation that they have kind of been trust fund babies. To me, if you don't work, you don't exist. I think you have to work. It doesn't have to change the world. It doesn't even have to change the block or the rural road that you live on, but you have to work. And again, it has to be hard. I measure people by that. I think work is part of salvation. Working for an honorable purpose is more a part of salvation.
Jay Rockefeller leaves the comfort and prestige of Harvard to teach English at the very new International Christian University in Tokyo, Japan. He decides to enroll as a student as well to learn the Japanese language. And all this makes sense. His parents had long worked on developing cultural ties with Japan, not a popular effort among many Americans following World War II. The Rockefellers had also made lasting friendships among the Japanese people, including one with Soichiro Toyota, who decades later would become chairman of Toyota Motor Corporation. As a teenager, Jay travels twice to Japan in the 1950s with his parents. Earlier, while at Exeter, he gets permission to skip a science class in order to take Chinese and Japanese history. So while Asian studies are already of interest to the Harvard student, leaving his senior year for Japan is not a calculated move.
It wasn't, in fact, calculated at all. My reason for going to Japan was I wanted to get out of what I thought I might become if I stayed at Harvard. Getting into something where I not only couldn't speak the language, but where everybody was different, and I was tremendously tall, and they'd never sort of seen anything like that before. So it was the getting out factor, putting yourself in hard situations, tough situations, where you have to survive by your wits and study of the language over a period of 3 years. That's a long time.
While Jay had visited the country before, he could not have known how living as a student in Japan would affect him.
This is 12 years after the end of the Second World War, and they were on the mat. They were down. They were struggling. In the deepest sense, they were struggling. Those were my friends. Those were my roommates. We lived together in the middle of a rice field in a paper and wood shack and walk or bicycle every day, in my case, to learn the Japanese language. Japanese is hard. The written language, 3,500 ideographs, kanji they call it, and it was hard. And that's when you got up really early in the morning, it was cold, and you practiced and you practiced and you practiced and you practiced. And I got good at Japanese. And I went to farms of my roommates, friends' families or their families, which had been in their families for 30 generations. and began to understand what a long, committed history of hard work and hardship brings to people. It was a very personal experience for me, a very deep experience. It was the beginning of putting me on the track to public service.
And so the seeds of what will become the second biggest single industrial investment in West Virginia history, the Toyota Motor Corporation plant in Buffalo, are sown in the late 1950s in a rice field in a small wooden house in late night and early morning study of the Japanese language.
Fast forward, and suddenly, what is happening? Toyota is bringing their plant to West Virginia, and who is in the middle making the deal but J. Rockefeller? He's the bridge.
1,200 jobs, $1.3 billion in investment after a decade of trips and meetings to promote West Virginia, his adopted home. As West Virginia's governor, Rockefeller will set up an economic development office in Japan, a move criticized by many during a national recession. Years later, as U.S. Senator, meeting with Dr. Soichiro Toyota and his staff in Japan, Rockefeller seals the deal for the automotive plant, thanks in part to his knowledge of the Japanese language.
And one of the Japanese said to the other, "This isn't going to work. This state is not the place to put this plant. Have you heard about the labor problems?" And I saw Jay just sitting there listening to this conversation. And then suddenly Jay spoke out in Japanese to the people having this conversation. They realized for the first time, oh my God, he recognized what we were saying, and the room fell silent. Having a U.S. Senator who speaks Japanese and writes Japanese was very useful in these discussions. And then we had a high five at the end of that meeting, and Dr. Toyo shook his hand and said, we're going to go to West Virginia. It was really awesome.
The doors are always open.
By the time Rockefeller retires from public office, more than 20 Japanese companies establish facilities in West Virginia.
I think it's impossible to overstate the significance of that relationship begun over a half century ago and what it's meant for West Virginia a half a century later. But not just the jobs created by foreign investment, but by jobs here created by West Virginians, direct investment by U.S. companies, West Virginia companies, small business entrepreneurs. You can really see Jay light up because he has a great appreciation of the power and importance of a job, and a good job for every West Virginian.
A grateful Japan bestows upon John D. Rockefeller IV the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun as he begins his final year in the U.S. Senate.
I think he has a very fair assessment between Japan and the U.S. He always tried to make the two bilateral relations better, like his father. We admire his family's contribution to Japan and the U.S. relationship very much. And join me as we salute our very good friend, Senator J. Rockefeller. Kanpai.
Two of the people who wanted to come were friends of mine from that place, and they couldn't come because they're older, and they texted me their sort of grief. And I texted them that as far as I was concerned, they were there. They'd always been there for me, and they were there on that night. We have enjoyed a deep friendship, rooted in our mutual values like service and dedication to our family and country. If I hadn't gone to Japan, would I have been here in West Virginia? I want to say yes, but I can't prove that. I had to get outside of my box, outside of my comfort zone, my privilege zone.
J. Rockefeller returns from Japan in 1960, a year he defies family Republican tradition. He votes for a Democrat for president.
I voted for Kennedy over Nixon, so that was the break point, right? I mean, that was an easy decision for me.
But he doesn't change his party registration. He says out of respect for his uncle Nelson, governor of New York, who's running for the Republican Party's presidential nomination.
And I could not go down and register as a Democrat because that would have been unkind or a slap in the face to him. So that's what held things up.
1960 is also the year Rockefeller gains national attention for articles published that summer in the New York Times and Life magazine. In the articles, he explores reasons for student demonstrations in Japan and Japan's mutual security treaty with the U.S. 1960 also ushers in America's decade of idealism, change, and political upheaval.
I'm a child of the 60s. Sounds funny to hear myself say that, but I am. People just believed in the promise of America and the promise of what was within each of them. And they weren't afraid to take on new things, new ideas. The Peace Corps, legal aid, Head Start, and all kinds of things that were put in place by a guy named R. Sargent Shriver, who is my all-time hero.
Rockefeller graduates Harvard in 1961 with a degree in Far Eastern languages and history. He immediately enters Yale for a 5-year program to learn Chinese. But the New York Times and Life magazine articles catch the attention of the new Kennedy administration, including Sargent Shriver, who's developing the Peace Corps program. Shriver sends a letter to J. Rockefeller, asking him to join the effort. Rockefeller leaves Yale, joins the National Advisory Council of the Peace Corps, and becomes a special assistant to Shriver in Washington.
He was so talented. He was so determined. He just never stopped pouring out good ideas and then making good on those ideas. The Peace Corps was laughed at by many in the very early 60s. And he went to every single congressperson and lobbied and got the money.
After a year, Shriver assigns Rockefeller to head the Philippines program, the largest in the Peace Corps.
We have a project in the Philippines requiring teachers of English.
Rockefeller meets Charlie Peters, Director of Evaluation at the Peace Corps, a West Virginia native and former state legislator.
One day, this tall, lanky guy stuck his nose into my door and said, X told me we should get to know each other, so you want to have lunch? So we had lunch, and it turned out our first bond was not over any high intellectual calling, but we both loved baseball and football, and so we got to talking about sports.
The Harvard-educated and well-connected Rockefeller knows the Kennedy family socially. He's attended White House dinners and been to Hickory Hills, Robert Kennedy's home.
Well, I expected him to be a stuffy prig. I just didn't imagine that someone that rich would be nice. I thought he'd be spoiled to death, and all of that, and very elitist. He was none of those things. He was very down-to-earth, super down-to-earth.
After 2 years in the Peace Corps, Rockefeller joins the State Department's Far Eastern Affairs Office, but soon confides in his close friend that he isn't satisfied as an administrative officer at a Washington desk. He wants a more hands-on job, working at a grassroots level, impacting poverty.
My first line of persuasion was, well, if you want to know about poverty, come to West Virginia.
Our program here in Charleston.
Robert Kennedy, who was then the Attorney General, was in charge of a program called the President's Council on Juvenile Delinquency, which was running the pilot programs that turned into the War on Poverty. And one of those was something called Action for Appalachian Youth, and headquartered in Charleston. Bobby said, well, if you want to go to West Virginia, why don't you check in with those people? So Jay went to work out in a little town called Emmons.
The isolated community of Emmons, West Virginia is located on the Kanawha County-Boone County border, 20 miles south of Charleston. Its population in 1964 is about 240. All but 13 of its 60 families are on welfare.
Anywhere I'd see him, he'd say, "Why, Shirley?" He just seemed like one of my boys.
Lifelong Emmons resident Shirley Giles was a member of one of those working families. In 1964, her husband is a chemical worker and a Baptist preacher. Shirley is raising their 2 sons and attending college.
When Jay came to Emmons, first time I saw him, he came over here in the yard, and I had all my mattresses out and sunned them. And I said, "You must be a Rockefeller." I looked up at him, I was short, and I was right. And from then on, we were very close.
Shirley soon learns the young man has an insatiable appetite.
Pinto beans and cornbread and fried pies, and said I baked fabulous pecan pies. We'd have cucumbers and onions in a dish with vinegar on it, and he'd just stick his fingers in there and eat it.
What is amazing is that there should not be an intersection between the man and the state. Jay is part of one of the wealthiest families in the nation, and he's coming to one of the poorest states in the nation. He seems like an alien. He seems like an outsider. And the term they used was carpetbagger. How will he adapt to the Appalachia that is not at all part of his experience?
Some people rejected him because they knew he had money and because of his name. A lot of people was on welfare and things like that, and drank, and that's all they knew.
Being a Vista volunteer is an incredibly intimate experience. I was this tall stranger coming from the city that everybody loved to hate, and with a name that lots of people loved to hate. And so what was I doing there? It was hard to explain it to myself even at the time, but I was trying to get out of my comfort zone and to learn what real people in the real world, what they face, what they're up against.
He's kind and tender and caring and loving and patient. He had to be patient to work here in Emmons, but he wasn't afraid to put his finger in it and get it burned.
What saved me is I've always been good with kids. There's one railroad track that goes through Emmons. I would sit on the rail. They would sit on the rail. We would sort of toss rocks, not at each other, but just pick them up and toss them. And then they got comfortable. And then one of them said, "Oh, come on, let's go back to my house and we'll get something to eat." And that broke the whole thing. I hadn't proved myself, but I had demystified myself in some way which they found acceptable.
We've started a domestic peace corps called Vista. 9,000 Americans have volunteered to serve in that for $50 a month.
The VISTA program emphasizes citizen-directed community improvement projects. But getting that input becomes another lesson in the education of Jay Rockefeller.
People generally, I think, in West Virginia are nervous about change because if you've got what you've got, at least you've got that. Even if you don't like it, you've got what you've got. And any idea of something new, doing something new, organizing a community organization was nerve-wracking. People would come to community meetings, and sometimes some of the men faced the other directions because they were not accustomed to talking in public settings. A community meeting was a strange organism and a threatening organism.
The national press follows John D. Rockefeller IV to West Virginia, which has a level of poverty only recently discovered by President Kennedy, and along with Kennedy, much of the rest of the nation. Rockefeller talks to reporters about a fatalism he sees in the community he's living in, comments that anger many West Virginians who let Jay know about it. This is the first of what will be a pattern for Jay Rockefeller throughout his career, speaking without filtering his comments, from saying West Virginians suffer with an inferiority complex while he's Secretary of State in the late 1960s, all the way to his last months in the U.S. Senate while chairing his Senate Commerce Committee, when he says some oppose the Affordable Care Act because President Obama is, quote, maybe of the wrong color. Rockefeller remains undeterred by the backlash over such comments.
You have to face up to things. that potentially hold you back. And if they make people uncomfortable, then you're wrong to say it if it's not true. If it is true, somebody has to say it. Maybe it shouldn't be me, but somebody has to say it. And you have to make people want to be, as they say, all that they can be.
Eventually, the hard feelings about the comment on fatalism in Emmons dissipate to a point that allows Rockefeller to assess multiple service needs and move several basic initiatives forward.
He provided transportation to the kids to dental clinics. He tried to encourage them to go to school. He helped a lot of children in the community get jobs. I don't know whether anybody could just came in and done that. It takes a special person.
Rockefeller uses his connections to bring celebrities to Emmons, like Cleveland Browns running back Jim Brown. He also brings Little League Baseball to the community.
We started a baseball team. They had never had a bat, they'd never had a glove. They'd thrown rocks, but they hadn't thrown baseballs. Baseballs were expensive. And they got pretty good, and they saw themselves getting pretty good.
Rockefeller leads the building of a community center, the material for which comes primarily from an abandoned school building in another section of the county.
It isn't the Rockefeller Center that the world thinks of, but to the people of Emmons, West Virginia, it's just as important. Rockefeller Center, consisting of a community building and park, was conceived by anti-poverty worker John D. Rockefeller IV. The people, in appreciation, named the center Rockefeller Center.
John D. Rockefeller III visits Emmons for the official opening. Jay is also successful in getting the women of Emmons access to mobile health screenings and successfully petitions the Board of Education to extend school bus service into the rural community.
It was clear he loved the people and they loved him. He was going to West Virginia to learn about poverty, learn about domestic problems. But now he'd fallen in love and he was going to stay.
It was really, really hard emotionally to see what they were going through, emotionally to see the way they were getting shafted at every corner by every form of government, private sector. And I kept a diary every day, which I didn't read for 50 years. It was sort of like a sacred document to me. In reading that, I realized how much I grew, how I changed, how much they did, the people of Emmons, to make me who I believe I am. But you can't stay your whole life at Emmons. And if you are going to do something more, which I wanted to, it has to be at a level where the reach of what you do is farther. You had to be in politics, in West Virginia politics, in national politics.
January 31st, 1966. After living 2 years in West Virginia, a state historically dominated by the Democratic Party, J. Rockefeller adds his name to the list of Kanawha County candidates vying for a seat in the House of Delegates. It is also the day he changes his voting registration from Republican to Democrat, to the disappointment of many Mountaineer Republicans.
I am a Democrat. Since 1960, I've really felt myself to be a Democrat, although I realize that public image would probably be different. But I've voted Democratic, I've contributed.
We in the Republican Party had high hopes that he would become our leader, to become the Republican candidate and be a leader. He, for whatever reason, chose the other route.
He's very liberal in terms of both social issues and economic. I think he gained that in the 1960s, that liberal agenda of governmental action. I see that as fitting into his character, and as we know, for the next 40 years in office, he was one of the most liberal Democrats we had. So this was no sheep's clothing cover at all. I think it fit the political need of winning, and it also was a comfortable fit in terms of ideology.
You only get reelected if you get things done, not if you promise them.
Knowing his uncle, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, plans to seek the presidency in 1968, Jay tells him of his Republican Party defection face to face.
He was very busy, but he fit me into a drive in his limousine from one appointment to another. And I told him, and he just stopped and turned and looked at me. And he said, I wish I'd done that.
Rockefeller says his Uncle Nelson, who represented the Republican Party's most liberal wing, felt an obligation to remain in the party because of family tradition.
And he meant it. His eyes misted over. I distinctly remember that. And then he was always very close to me afterwards because he felt that I was doing something hard. I had a job, you know. I was in politics. And it's rough and tumble in New York, and it's rough and tumble in West Virginia.
The 28-year-old's candidacy for West Virginia House of Delegates becomes national news. The New York Times says Rockefeller is a shoo-in, and it is a spectacular May primary win. Among about 60 candidates for 14 House seats, he leads the entire field, 7,000 votes ahead of the second-place candidate. While in November's general election, Republicans capture 9 of those 14 seats, Rockefeller again gets the most votes, 4,000 votes ahead of his nearest competitor.
In the House, as a member of the legislature, he was influential, even as a freshman.
Tom Potter is one of the 9 Republicans who capture House seats from Kanawha County in 1966.
I have fond memories of Jay. He was a very congenial guy, good to talk to, nice to be around, a little bit aloof, as I recall, spoke his mind when he needed to, and otherwise kept pretty much to himself. He was not totally comfortable being a West Virginian at the time, but he adapted rapidly, and he was well liked by everyone around him.
Jay, I would not say that he was aloof or distant. What I would say is that he was like a duck that's calm on the top and paddling like hell underneath.
Rockefeller successfully shepherds a stream pollution control bill through the legislature that first session, but operates mostly behind the scenes.
In the legislature, it isn't always what you pass or you defeat, it's what you do in committees where you make your reputation. He evolved as a leader of the Finance Committee, not the chair, but as one whose views were sought.
But the year 1967 stands out in Rockefeller's journey, not so much for that inaugural session, but as the year he marries Sharon Percy on the 1st of April.
I volunteered in my first campaign when I was 14 years old for Don Rumsfeld, who's now Secretary of Defense. I met Jay while I was working in a congressman's office in Washington. His name was Gerald Ford. And of course I campaigned for my father.
Sharon Percy, daughter of future Republican U.S. Senator Charles Percy of Illinois, is a student intern from Stanford University when she first agrees to a date with Jay Rockefeller.
She came down the stairs, turned right, and I was facing this absolute vision of beauty in a white dress, blonde hair, just wonderful human being. I never had another date after that.
At the time, Percy is a member of the Stanford Chorus.
She has a beautiful voice, a soprano voice, absolutely beautiful. The Stanford Chorus was singing with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, Haydn's Creation, which I love. I was in the audience. For some reason, there was a light way up in the ceilings, which seemed to be shining directly on her blonde head. And it just washed me away.
I had a year to finish in college. We fell in love pretty quickly, but obviously I was going to finish school. And then things started picking up steam right after that, after I graduated.
Two of America's most wealthy, prominent, and influential families are united in marriage. John D. Rockefeller IV takes Sharon Lee Percy for his wife. Illinois Senator Charles Percy is father of the bride. Guests include George Hamilton and Linda Bird Johnson. Political, business, and society leaders watch Sharon Lee and John blissfully kiss single life goodbye.
Okay, girls, come on. Sharon Percy Rockefeller has been Jay Rockefeller's partner in every way. As a seasoned campaigner herself, she's been of great support and counsel.
Politics is not for sissies. It's really hard, and you have to have a tough skin to get through it, and you have to really believe that your message and what you're trying to do is the right thing to do. And if you believe that, you just plow forward.
The 22-year-old bride and Jay's mother, Blanchette, become very close.
She and I hit it right off. My mother had died young, so I just found it very easy to be with her. I guess that was it. And we both liked the same things, and above all, she liked art. She was president of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which was founded by her mother-in-law, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller. Now I'm a board member of the Museum of Modern Art, so this sort of gets passed down through the daughters-in-law, less the name Rockefellers through the sons, but the art interest is very definitely there in the women of the family. And we really did quite adore each other.
Blanchette Rockefeller watches in delight as her daughter-in-law develops her own interests and takes on her own causes. She founds the Mountain Artisans, a quilting business for low-income West Virginia women. This while working as a teacher's assistant. She serves on the board of Sunrise Museum, the West Virginia Humanities Council, and Holtz Elementary PTA. Sharon Rockefeller goes from board member of the West Virginia Educational Broadcasting Authority to a national player in public broadcasting, all while raising 4 children and always supporting her husband's work.
Who is an enormous factor in my life? Sharon, my wife. Strong women. There's a great value in marrying strong women.
You recommend it?
I recommend it.
With the support of his new bride, Jay Rockefeller enters a 3-way primary race for West Virginia Secretary of State in early 1968.
The question is, if you have corrupt elections, and I'd say in most places we don't have them in this state, in the vast majority of places, but we do in some places, and that's an incredibly great evil, the fact of having those corrupt elections. And stopping that, I think, is important.
I will never forget the conversation we had around the rotunda before he made that decision, where I urged him to run for treasurer because at the time we had a treasurer who later was convicted and sent to prison. And I thought that he had an opportunity to replace him, but he took the open seat, which was the smart political thing to do. The rest is kind of history.
But Rockefeller is offered an opportunity that could have altered history that summer when U.S. Senator Robert Kennedy of New York is gunned down.
And I was devastated. My uncle, Nelson Rockefeller, governor of the state of New York, called me and said, "Jay, I want you to take his seat." Now that's very awkward. I said, no. I said, first of all, I think that's called nepotism, but he had the power to appoint me. And I said no to him, it was just immediate. And he said I could do it as a Democrat, but it just gets back to the same thing. I knew what I was doing. I was still in West Virginia early. I wanted to stay.
Rockefeller continues campaigning, giving speeches like this one to a society of professional engineers in Huntington.
He said that he was glad to be there, even though many of them had come to see what a real live carpetbagger looks like. I thought then, and still think now, that it was very savvy on his part to confront the carpetbagger issue so directly. I came away very impressed.
With Sharon by his side, Jay campaigns to victory in November, beating Republican candidate John Caleb's by 155,000 votes. Rockefeller immediately pushes for election law reform, using his office to bust up several notorious county political machines, all Democratic.
Democrats must be willing to commit themselves to election law reform. We have to take the lead in that.
Rockefeller was this wonderful, wealthy, amazing, nationally recognized young man who had come in to save West Virginia with all the liberal ideas and principles. Once he was elected Secretary of State, he decided he was going to get rid of the 5 most corrupt members of the state Senate. And so as the liberal wing of the Democratic Party watched with shining amazement and everybody else watched in horror, these young Turks went down and they took out of the Senate Noah Floyd of the Noah Floyd machine in Mingo County, and they took out W. Bernard Smith of Logan County. There were 5 of them they took out.
I had to make some changes. I said that there would be, in the running of an election, no more exchange of cash. Everything had to be done by a check, for which there are obviously receipts. So everything is transparent. The place went crazy. And the second thing I did was I issued an order that all dead people who were still registered on the voting rolls and who all had been voting for a number of years had to be banned and excluded and taken off the voting rolls. And they were. It turned out there were 10,000 of them. Now, if you're a Democratic county chairman in southern West Virginia, you are not happy about that. If you're a Democratic county chairman anywhere, you're not happy about that. But it was the right thing to do.
That first year in statewide office is also marked by the July birth of the Rockefellers' first child, John, nicknamed Jamie, who will eventually also choose the middle name Davison. The young family splits time between their Charleston home and a just-purchased 3,000-acre home site in Pocahontas County. The Secretary of State sets his sights on the governor's mansion. By 1970, Secretary of State Rockefeller is acting more and more like gubernatorial candidate Rockefeller. He's criticizing the extremely popular Republican governor, Arch Moore, for taking credit for successes that Rockefeller says aren't rightfully Moore's, and he's criticizing executive decisions.
One of the problems was the governor didn't include it in his call. He didn't recognize it as a problem. He didn't say there was a problem. He didn't ask for any more money. And we cannot have that in this state, to have children without food.
J. Rockefeller declares his candidacy for governor in January 1972. After a Democratic primary win with 72% of the vote, the 35-year-old faces 49-year-old Arch Moore.
These are 2 men very generationally apart and politically generationally apart as well.
Good morning.
Governor Moore was kind of the old school West Virginia politician, and J. Rockefeller positioned himself as new school, was going to think differently about politics in the state. And that was what attracted me and many others to his campaign.
50,000 new jobs.
It was clear that this is a guy who was willing to look at things differently that had been ingrained in West Virginia for generations. He was going to be a different leader in the state. That pulled me to him, and others it repulsed.
Rockefeller again enters the national spotlight as Parade magazine predicts the candidate will seek the U.S. presidency after serving as governor of West Virginia. He's compared to John Kennedy for his, quote, youth, energy, and loyalty. And Sharon Rockefeller is compared to Jackie Kennedy, described as young, pretty, and stylish.
I don't think people vote for or against a candidate because of his wife, but it always helps to meet people. And I think this is what's been lost in American politics.
You're going to invest $80 million.
The months pass and the gubernatorial campaign grows increasingly ugly.
These are the 31 jobs created to elect this man to public office, and not one for the benefit of the state of West Virginia.
Your record is clear on manufacturing loss of over 10,000 jobs. You have failed.
Rockefeller, as he did in 1968, faces harsh criticism for his exemption from military service.
To my knowledge, he is the only person in the history of the state of West Virginia to claim legislative services to gain exemption from military service. I am glad that this dubious distinction is held by a displaced New Yorker and not a native West Virginian.
I was between wars, between the Korean and the Vietnam War, and when it came my time for service, there was a president who said something about trying to help one's country, and there being no war, I joined the Peace Corps.
There's the famous commercial in 1972 against Rockefeller, where a New York City taxi cab driver was intercepted by a crew and a microphone was put in his face, and the question was asked, what would you think about a West Virginian becoming governor of New York? And the cab driver looked, interestingly at the question and then laughed. And that was the commercial, one 30-second spot. Devastating spot, and because it filled all the negatives that people had about Jay.
But Jay had stepped into a hornet's nest of his own making, declaring he'd work to outlaw strip mining in West Virginia.
We cannot have strip mining as an industry and still hope to have my children, but more important, their children, have a place where they can happily live and work. And I think only an abolition of strip mining will make that possible.
That certainly pleased his base of reformers, but it certainly upset the coal interest and the coal supporters.
I voted for him before, but I don't intend to vote for him again, and from what I've heard, speaking to the people involved in this situation, I don't think any of us are.
Things were just out of sync. Whatever his intentions were, they weren't taken that way, and they weren't to hurt the coal industry as much as help it and not do so much damage to the environment. That's what that was about. The economy was bad, and when the economy's bad, everything else gets negative too.
I remember being on the J bus and going through McDowell County, and this is not a figment of my imagination. There actually were people with rifles up on some of the mountaintops. And I remember at one point Jay saying, "I want a frozen custard" at that stand right over there. And his chief of security, his bodyguard, whom we called Odd Job, said, "I don't think it's a good idea to get out of the J bus here and walk over there right now. I mean, you're in deep strip mining territory. They are very antagonistic toward you." And he said, "I don't give a damn. I want a frozen custard." So he got out and he went over and he got it and got back on the bus.
In 1972, I was 14 years old, and he came to my high school, Sophia High School in Raleigh County. And my dad was the assistant principal and actually was tasked with taking him around. And underdog, given his position on strip mining, he wasn't exactly popular. So it was a very rainy evening, just sheets of rain, and they moved the homecoming festivities into the gymnasium, but he couldn't speak in the gymnasium. Instead, he was told he could speak out in the stadium, in literally sheets of rain, and there were maybe 24 people who would come out from the gym to hear him. And I connected with that. He had come to my little town and waited for his turn to speak, and did so in a driving rain.
As West Virginia's gubernatorial campaign thunders to a close, the two candidates are doing what they've been doing for the past few months. Candidate Rockefeller is out campaigning, shaking hands, making speeches, and promising things. Arch Moore is telling the voters what he has done.
November 7th, 1972. Jay Rockefeller, whose political star had seemed unstoppable, is trounced in the general election.
We knew how we wanted to develop the campaign, and it went just generally according to scale.
In a state that has a 2-to-1 Democratic majority, Republican Arch Moore wins a second term by 73,000 votes.
1972 was a disaster for the Democrats nationwide because McGovern was seen as too radical. So they were defeated across the way. More importantly, Jay was going against the most popular governor and certainly the most popular Republican governor, Arch Moore, a governor in the governor's mansion who was an amazing campaigner. And it was seen by Jay and those around him that his stand on strip mining cost him the election. And the fourth was money, that people were distrustful about the money.
Here's the verdict.
At the very end, I didn't realize, because the campaign didn't tell me that he was going to lose. And I remember election night thinking, I was just crying and what's going on? And they had polling, they knew, but losses are losses. It's how people pick themselves up and put their lives back together that matters.
And I certainly don't rule out another run at the governorship in 1976, but I think
Jay Rockefeller learned several lessons from his only defeat at the polls.
Jay in 1972 and before 1972 failed to understand just how complex something like surface mining is. Not because Jay isn't smart, wouldn't have understood it, but he reacted to the issue like most people react to surface mining initially, from an emotional standpoint. It's just emotional, stripping a mountaintop. But the issue is far more complex than that. If you look at sustainable communities in West Virginia, that is more than just whether or not you have the mountaintop on. It's whether you have people working, whether people can afford to send kids to college. It's whether communities can afford to put water and sewer in.
Seasoned by his loss, Rockefeller becomes more politically astute.
I don't mean he reversed positions. He certainly evolved on something like coal.
Is that right?
Yeah. He chose words carefully. He positioned himself a little more carefully. He became very sophisticated in the way he looked at these issues and understood that a lot of things are not black and white. Politics, getting to the right place, sometimes you live in gray.
You have to go through a campaign, and sometimes you have to lose a campaign to know what the stakes are and know what the price is, and also to know how much you want it. Energy and wanting it is basic to politics. And I wanted it, and then when I lost it, that was a lesson to me, that you have to understand better than I did how politics works. But I learned that stuff, and I learned how to play hard and to win.
Records show the Arch Moore campaign spending $696,000 on the 1972 election. The Rockefeller campaign spends more than twice that, $1.5 million, a record at the time, but only a fraction of what will be spent in Rockefeller campaigns to come.
This doesn't look like Siberia. It's a picture-perfect small college campus. But it's a kind of exile for a man who wanted the biggest office in the state, possibly self-imposed to come so far from the political heartbeat of the state, but possibly imposed by an overwhelming number of the voters who said these next 4 years are not his politically in West Virginia.
In West Virginia, if you're going to be one of us, you've got to get beaten upside the head, and you fall down, and then you get up, either pouting or with a smile on your face, ready for the next whatever. And I did the second. And it changed people's views about me in great measure.
Within 2 months of his gubernatorial defeat, Jay Rockefeller is named the president of West Virginia Wesleyan College, a small, conservative, and Methodist liberal arts institution in the very Republican town of Buchanan.
I believe a college has to be part of a community and part of a county and part of a state. And when the college came to me and asked me to do this work or consider the work, one of the things they said is they wanted to see Wesleyan even more a part of West Virginia as a whole and this area.
Accompanied by much fanfare, John D. Rockefeller III delivers the keynote address following his son's investiture.
I am pleased as a father would be that my son has entered into a relatively stable line of employment.
Jay Rockefeller will be the college's first president not to be Methodist. He's Presbyterian. Its first president not to be an ordained minister. And its first president who lacks an earned doctorate degree. Once again, Rockefeller sets out to prove himself in a small West Virginia community.
There were people's noses were out of joint because he didn't have the academic background and he didn't have the degrees and was a politician. There was a lot of snarking going on amongst the community and particularly, and I dare say this, the faculty, at least the people on the faculty that I knew.
I was at peace with myself. I was at peace with the world. I didn't care a whole lot what people thought about me if I had a good feeling about what I was doing.
I think he achieved more in a short period of time than many presidents have achieved for a long period of time. Some students even said they loved talking to him because it was like talking to their dad. I mean, he was fatherly. And to the faculty, he always wanted to help us. I remember receiving a memo from him and saying, what is it that you need in your department to help achieve your academic goals? I don't remember any president asking us that, even after he was here.
Students and faculty are amazed at how the new president is seen everywhere, seemingly involved in everything, and once again broadening the world of those around him.
He sat in the cafeteria and ate with us, and we talked about political issues and what was going on in America during that time. I think Jay really challenged us to remain current and to be well-read and to know what was going on around us. And at the same time, I think Jay had a real passion for service that came through his experience before he had come to Wesleyan and serving others. That was something that he pushed us to do as well.
Wesleyan students also see the competitive side of their president, a die-hard sports enthusiast.
Jay Rockefeller was loved by students because he was one of us. He sat in the middle of the cheering section of football games and basketball games, and I can remember that he'd be drenched with sweat from jumping up and down and rallying with the crowd. He played racquetball with us. He played handball. He was a fierce racquetball player. He had a wingspan of a condor. We all dreaded playing him because he couldn't get the ball by him, but he was so much fun to play with.
Rockefeller leads the college's effort to build a multi-purpose recreational center, personally contributing $250,000 to its construction. The facility helps turn the college's basketball program into a source of community pride. Not far from campus, the Rockefellers are raising their small children. Jamie, who turns 4 in 1973, his sister Valerie, age 2, and newborn Charles. Donna Hawking's children attend the same daycare as Jamie and Valerie.
He was a real hands-on dad. I mean, I can remember seeing him, and you can't miss him. He's so darn tall. And he'd be walking down, coming from the college with Jamie on his shoulders, giving him piggyback ride to this gal's house. Those kids were just beautiful kids, and they were hands-on parents. Sharon at that point was getting involved with the Sesame Street people and that end of public television, and they were really concerned about what kids should be involved in and what kids needed to learn, and they were forward-thinking.
By the spring of 1975, Wesleyan student recruitment is up 30%, and fundraising has doubled. Rockefeller submits his letter of resignation to the Board of Trustees, saying he needs to prepare for the following year's gubernatorial race. After his departure, what is commonly known as the new gym is dedicated in 1976 and named the John D. Rockefeller IV Physical Education Center.
I run for governor because I know our people in West Virginia want, and in fact hunger for, absolute personal honesty and integrity in the governor's office. And because people want strong executive leadership.
As the nation marks the bicentennial year of 1976, Rockefeller's second campaign for governor is in full swing. He campaigns for jobs, health care, better roads, seniors, the environment, and yes, coal. The country is experiencing an energy shortage. He says he's changed his mind on strip mining because of better reclamation practices.
I think there's been change in the way the coal industry itself has reacted to some of the pressure that's been brought upon them by environmentalists.
But Rockefeller's incredible wealth and campaign spending are still issues.
The point is not whether you're worth $100 or $100,000. The point is,
how does he turn the liability of great inherited wealth into a political campaign asset? And he does that by saying, I can't be bribed. I have so much money that I can say no to those lobbyists. I can say no to those special interests.
Rockefeller spends $1.7 million in the primary election. He reports $1.1 million as his own money. He easily beats his 7 Democratic opponents, including Supreme Court Justice Jim Sprouse and Congressman Ken Heckler.
I'll tell you, it starts all over again. The thing is, you win,
And then your work just begins, but that's of course the way we want it.
Jay Rockefeller now faces Republican candidate and former governor Cecil Underwood.
As our candidates, myself included, begin to move much more aggressively, the Republican vote will be there. I don't fear of losing it. I think it'll be there in great strength. We'll have a record vote, I'm sure.
West Virginia's 1976 general election is another one for the history books. Jay Rockefeller defeats Cecil Underwood by more than 242,000 votes, the largest majority in state history. Rockefeller reports spending just under $2 million of his own money of the total $2.7 million spent on his campaign. At his inauguration, the 29th governor of West Virginia envisions big changes and a bright future.
Today, we leave behind the defeatism of the past. Starting here, starting now. You and I together step out into the rising sun of a new day for West Virginia.
The Rockefeller experience, I think, has been described as baptism by fire, but I think if any gubernatorial historian looks at those 8 years, they will find them the most challenging when it comes to crisis management of perhaps any governor since Kump during the Great Depression.
It starts on day one. The inaugural crowd endures temperatures of 3 below zero, with a wind chill factor that drops down to 25 below. The Arctic weather continues that week and the next. Then predictions of a significant snowstorm drive the brand new governor to take one of his earliest executive actions, one that he's still living down today. He uses the emergency broadcasting system to tell everyone to stay home. Everything is closed, public events canceled.
The National Weather Service, which this morning was predicting
The storm that never materializes comes to be known as Jay's Blizzard.
Jay's Blizzard, just to whoosh, like that. And the sun came out at noon, and I've been teased about that ever since. But, by golly, if it had happened and if people had been out there on the roads, it would have been a catastrophe. So you learn that a lot of things come up very suddenly, and you better be prepared to deal with them.
I'm Dolly Varney from Williamson, West Virginia. I was flooded out.
No one is prepared for the 1977 spring floods, bringing destruction to the southern counties of McDowell, Wayne, Logan, and Mingo.
Towns like Matewan wiped off the map. This lady, gray-haired lady, grandmotherly-like, came sobbing up to Rockefeller and just put her arms around him, and he, like he does so many people, just kind of this big wrap around this woman, and had tears in her eyes, listening to her story about losing her son in the flood, and it really connected the people at that time of Mingo County to Jay Rockefeller, because they felt like he understood. He wasn't supposed to stay overnight. He stayed overnight. He did, as much as he could, would go and help pick up stuff. He tried to get engaged and understood the importance of connecting to individuals.
Safe housing above floodplains becomes a focus of the Rockefeller administration. The governor sets records in secondary road construction, and as the recently appointed chair of President Jimmy Carter's Commission on Coal, he pushes for a national energy policy that has its foundation in Appalachian coal.
the long-term future of coal is a strong one.
He was sort of a rock star politician for West Virginia in those early days, and everybody believed that he had ambitions to go higher in office. And that was a good thing, because I think that helped make him a more effective political leader and governor. But I think most folks were very impressed with how hard he worked at the job. And I don't think there's a more difficult job in the state, certainly, and maybe one of the toughest governorships in the country, just because of the nature of West Virginia and our history and our problems.
The problems I see are, one, we got, and your people are
Beyond record snowfalls and floods, the late 1970s bring inflation, fuel shortages, and the worst construction accident in state history at the Willow Island plant of Monongalia Power Company. This is followed by a deadly prison break at the Moundsville Penitentiary and ongoing coal mining deaths.
civil insurrection, prison riots, hostages,
all kinds of emergencies are what we have to be prepared for.
I think there are two types of governors. I think there are those that like the political games, like to be out front, like to shake up the bureaucracy, like to get micromanaging into the bureaucracy, like the battles with the legislature. That's one type of governor. I think that's the type of governor that Arch Moore was. Then there's the type of governor who is immersed in issues and is a big picture thinker and likes to understand an issue fully and then plant the flag and try to take the state from here to there. And he was that type of governor.
Rockefeller creates the West Virginia Board of Coal Mine Health and Safety. He proposes bills that ultimately reorganize state agencies, and he sets up senior centers statewide.
I care a lot about senior citizens, and there were a lot of those in Emmons. But it wasn't until I became governor that I was able to say, okay, over the next 4 years or 8 years, whatever it turns out to be, I'm going to build a senior center in every of the 55 counties of West Virginia. And I did. That's what you can't do as a social worker in Emmons, what you can do if you are in a public policy making position.
As governor, he creates the Office of Community and Economic Development. He reaches out for Japanese investment and becomes increasingly frustrated with President Carter's lack of action on his commission's coal report. In the middle of all this, a 111-day national coal mining strike.
Jay was not always on the side of the unions in those strikes, and he would push the unions as hard as anyone would push the unions, using his power and influence of the office, and yes, listening to what they might need in order to make a settlement. He understood, he was listening, he was patient, he did what he needed to do to try to avert disaster or more violence. I think West Virginians understood this man who had come from New York, was really becoming part of us, more a West Virginian every single day.
Members of the media recall Governor Rockefeller as extremely accessible.
I was working for the Gulf Times, a little weekly paper in Raleigh County based in Sophia. I called his office and asked for some information about a topic I can't remember. I said I was wondering if you could help me in writing this story. And a couple hours later, I was really surprised because I'm sure that Governor Rockefeller didn't know me from the man in the moon. And I get a call in the office, and I thought it was a joke at first. The call said, "Paul, this is Jay. How are you?" I said, "Okay." I said, "If you have a moment right now, and it's convenient for you, I'll be happy to answer the questions you wanted to ask me." I said, well, thank you very much, Governor. And I then proceeded to ask him questions.
It's just an absolutely fascinating business.
Sharon Rockefeller is an energetic First Lady of West Virginia, pursuing several endeavors, including promoting public television.
Often, television insults the viewer, and they should have better programming, and that's why I'm working for public television.
The Rockefellers are now raising their 4 children in the governor's mansion.
They were all happy and proud to be raised in West Virginia. We were happy and proud of that too. They had so many friends at school. But for us, the hard part was making sure they were growing up normally, so to speak. Well, they had the name Rockefeller, and they were living downtown in a governor's mansion and being driven to school sometimes by the state police. So it isn't normal in anybody else's world. But we had to establish a climate inside the house, I think, of, well, okay, kids are kids. Kids better get their homework done. Kids better clean up their room. The little basics don't change.
At the end of Rockefeller's first term, the administration touts the creation of 50,000 jobs. But one of his biggest victories that first term is today one of his biggest regrets. The legislature passes Rockefeller's bill to gradually eliminate the consumer sales tax on food.
I remember getting rid of the sales tax on food, which was probably not a very smart idea. I think I did it to help me win the campaign, and it was devastating on the state treasury. That was a mistake, I think, that I made. I made a campaign promise, and by God, I was going to keep that promise.
I am announcing today.
In March 1980, J. Rockefeller's family, including the newest member, 8-month-old Justin, is gathered around the governor as he announces his intention of serving a second term.
We've had our share of setbacks, and we've made our share of mistakes too, but we have also achieved a great deal together.
The state's 1980 governor's race sets the stage for a rematch between J. Rockefeller and former Governor Arch Moore.
We have started modestly a media campaign which will begin to build until the November election, and it will parallel all of our media campaigns of the past. The question is, will it be drowned out by the opposition's media campaign?
Rockefeller is again criticized for using his own substantial wealth to fund his campaign.
Some political ambitious people treat power like it's a gold watch. It's a reward for what I did. And other people, like Jay and like John Kennedy and LBJ and Bobby, they treat power as something that you can use. Now, if you know power can be used to help the people, what will you do to get power? There's nothing as bad as a defeated politician, because not only have they been defeated, they have never been able to hold the power. So when Jay needs to spend money, the floodgates open.
J. Rockefeller sets national records in campaign spending and personal contribution. $11.6 million by a candidate. The Moore campaign spends just under $1 million.
I came up with the idea of a bumper sticker that said, "Arch, make him spend it all." The issue of his money became significant. It enabled him to win in tight races. And I don't mean to imply that he ever used it illegally or in an improper way. He was very careful about that. But it was a resource that could not be matched.
What do we have today? We have people who are elected and supported with the same amounts of money, huge amounts of money, that come from outside the state of West Virginia and elect people, and we don't even know who contributed to them and to whom they owe that debt of gratitude for their election. I would much prefer to have someone openly, publicly spend their own money as Senator Rockefeller did than the system we have today. Any day, I'd rather have that.
The lesser point is that at least I wasn't taking money from, coal companies or whatever in large amounts, et cetera, which is generally the way people build up war chests. Secondly, it was my own money, and there was nothing illegal, although it was unsettling, granted, to me and to others, that I spent that. Third point, I wanted to win. I wanted to win. I'd lost once and I didn't like it, and I wanted to win.
How sweet it is!
J. Rockefeller beats Arch Moore by 64,000 votes. During Rockefeller's second term as governor, West Virginia suffers significantly in the midst of federal funding cuts and what's described as the trickle-down economics of President Ronald Reagan's administration.
Because of the downturn in the economy, which was severe and lasted for over 2.5 years, we lost coal mining jobs because the coal was needed to make coke, to make steel. We lost steel jobs. Weirton Steel almost closed and had to be saved. We lost glass maker jobs because the glass companies were competing with foreign companies. At one point, we were paying out $500 million a year in unemployment compensation benefits, and the federal government was cutting our staff.
Almost every day, it felt like you'd pick up the paper and see where there was some mine closing or another plant closing. And so it was a lot of fighting to keep what we had. And also, people were hurting.
Now, if you're governor of West Virginia and you're sitting there with this collapsing economy and money is not coming into your state coffers, there aren't a lot of new initiatives that you can launch.
One of the biggest disappointments of Rockefeller's second term is a promised $500 million federal demonstration plant in coal liquefaction that is planned for Morgantown. The project is started under the Carter administration and scrapped under President Reagan. In his second term, Governor Rockefeller also deals with a teacher's walkout and a lengthy statewide coal miners' strike.
The overriding principle for me as governor during these past 8 years was win
we were in a position to be able to do it, we did it. When we had the resources to carry through, we did it.
What would you say were your biggest accomplishments in your 8 years in the governor's office?
This is going to sound a little bit silly, but I was honest. You better start out that way. I had a head of one of my departments, which had a large lobby, and I found out that that person was out in a western state hunting with a whole lot of lobbyists for what they wanted from him. I called him up and fired him on the phone. I never had to do anything like that again. The message was sent. Don't do wrong.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that's one of the strongest things about his administration. You know, as West Virginians, we sort of grow up hearing the legends of corruption in West Virginia politics, and unfortunately there are too many present-day examples to ignore that. But the Rockefeller administration and the governor himself, I think, set a very high standard of ethics, not just being honest, but also being trustworthy in the way they addressed issues and putting politics aside and trying to do what was best for the state, even in a difficult political environment. And having someone as prominent as a Rockefeller come in and get elected, and then doing a good job and seeing things improve in the state was a very important symbolic achievement, I think, for West Virginia. It showed a lot of us that we're worth something.
Do you look back with regret on what was?
No, I don't, because I was learning like crazy. Being a governor is very hard, and you're one among one, and everybody looks to you. A lot of the governor's job is ceremonial too, and I don't enjoy that as much. You're constantly going to governors have to be there type events, as opposed to long policy discussions and working things through with a lot of staff conflicting, and it's not as cerebral as being in the Senate.
So while you were a governor, you knew you wanted to shoot for the Senate?
Yes. Yeah. And because there was always a huge interest to me. In the Senate, you get to pick and choose where you go, where it'll have the best effect.
Rockefeller, Sanders, Schatz, Shaheen, Stabenow,
And
Tester,
that's where
Udall of
huge
Colorado,
decisions
Udall
get
of New
made.
Mexico.
But when I ran for the Senate, you know what my job approval rating was at the end of 8 years of being governor of West Virginia? 19%. 19%, and I won.
What do you attribute that to? That was one hard-fought campaign.
Yeah. Well, there were several of them, and I don't know what I attribute it to. But I had been toughened by the experience of being governor.
It's 1984, and J. Rockefeller is making a bid for the office he's longed for. He faces Republican challenger Morgantown businessman John Racy in the race for U.S. Senate, another extremely negative campaign.
If you were elected, would you vote for Robert C. Byrd to be majority leader again and return West Virginia to the #1 position in the United States Senate, or would you go with your Republican colleagues and vote against him? I want to know the answers to those questions.
Mr. Racy.
It'd be hard to do because Robert Byrd will be in the minority, and I couldn't vote for a majority leader that's in the minority.
By election day, local news reports say the race is a dead heat.
I had a CBS News producer come to me at 6 p.m. and told me that the exit polls that CBS was going to announce showed Jay losing the race by a single percentage point, and suggested that I go up to Barbary Lane to tell the First Family that they were going to lose the election. And the exit polls, in fact, showed that, but at the end of the day, Jay pulled it out. Thanks to Mingo and Logan and the southern West Virginia counties and the little white-haired lady that he was so connected to in the state. So, tough election, tough election.
The race is another record breaker. The Rockefeller camp spends $12 million. $10.2 million comes from the candidate. The Racy campaign spends $1.1 million, with $441,000 coming directly from the candidate. It's the third most expensive Senate race in the nation in 1984. It's also the third closest race. Rockefeller wins by 4 percentage points.
I have a tremendous sense of what our future can be and how I can help as your United States Senator.
John D. Rockefeller IV, representing his adopted home of West Virginia, goes to Washington, D.C., where he fills the seat of retiring Senator Jennings Randolph. Working alongside Senator Robert C. Byrd, J. Rockefeller will go on to be re-elected 4 times in 1990, 1996, 2002, and 2008, serving a total of 30 years in the U.S. Senate.
Standing up for our veterans has been one of the top priorities since I began public service.
He'll have tenures as chair of the Committee on Veterans Affairs, chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and chair of the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation.
Any effort to revise or update the law must keep consumers front and center and is something that we will be watching extremely closely.
But the name J. Rockefeller on Capitol Hill may be most closely identified as chair of the Senate Finance Committee's subcommittee on health care, as a champion of health care coverage for all.
Our problem is that we treat potential solutions in health care on like a short-term basis.
You had J. Rockefeller fighting for health care reform before it was known as Hillary Care or Obamacare. J. Rockefeller was in there fighting.
I wanted to be good at health care. It's my general thought, if you don't have health care, you don't have anything, no matter what else you might think you have. And it was certainly true in Emmons, West Virginia. But it started, to me, with the Pepper Commission. Then it went to the Children's Commission. Then plunging deep dive into the Clinton health care bill. Then eventually the Affordable Care Act. But I learned health care through work and through passion. What triggered it? Those 2 years in Emmons.
He's at the forefront of every major health care fight in the Senate, preserving and expanding both Medicaid and Medicare.
In the end, I want to enact a bill that guarantees West Virginians the same access to life-saving and life-enhancing prescription drugs as people in other states.
J. Rockefeller also authors the Children's Health Insurance Program, known as CHIP.
Most of the people who don't have health insurance, the kids, their families are working.
In 2015, CHIP is providing health care to 8 million children in low-income families.
CHIP really helped out because there was a lot of things that I needed in life to help me get by.
Delivering on the Children's Health Insurance Program is probably the singular achievement of his Senate years, and he was made chairman of the National Commission on Children, in which healthcare became a huge part of that. So healthcare spans this whole range. He knows it cold, understands it better than anybody in the Senate.
I'm of the belief that the ACA is probably the most complex piece of legislation ever passed by the United States Congress.
When the Affordable Care Act came along, there was some confusion about what could happen to the Children's Health Insurance Program because it could have gotten gobbled up in the exchange. And he actually, at a late stage, pushed through an amendment that kept the CHIP program intact for several years so that there will be no loss due to friction or changes as the Affordable Care Act is implemented. So I think that was probably a signature achievement, in addition to his support for the Affordable Care Act. So I think together those are huge accomplishments.
10 years from now, we'll still have to fix some things, but 10 years from now, people are going to say, what was all that fuss about? We've got a great healthcare system. You don't think that makes me happy? It does.
His earlier work on universal health care and the partisan politics coming into play to derail that work motivate J. Rockefeller of West Virginia to contemplate a run for the U.S. presidency. It's 1991. He's 54 years old and the president-appointed chair of the National Commission on Children. The Blue Ribbon Bipartisan Group is to vote on recommendations and report those back to President George Herbert Walker Bush and Congress.
Just on the eve of the vote, President Bush made phone calls into his commission members and got them to change their votes from what they had committed to Rockefeller. And there was a tie vote, so all of the recommendations of the commission, including children's health care, failed. And Rockefeller was just furious that the White House had engaged because you'll recall George Bush was campaigning on a no new taxes pledge. Read my lips, no new taxes.
Rockefeller leaves Washington livid, on his way to give the keynote speech to a gathering of the Democratic Leadership Council meeting in Cleveland.
He got off the plane and I had no more than said hello to him and was helping with one of his bags. That he said, you know what, I'm going to use my platform tomorrow to announce my candidacy for president. And I was totally flabbergasted. There had been no conversation. This was not pre-thought. There was no plan, no strategy. This was just Rockefeller really being angry. If the president's going to do this to me, then the nation should know, and we're going to have a national debate about this. So we were in the car on our way back to the airport to go back to Charleston, and it occurred to Jay, you know, oh my God, I didn't speak to Sharon about this, or we didn't tell our press secretary, or like there was no planning here. And so Jay had to call Sharon. You may get a phone call. And this whole process began for us in 1991.
Even as I and the entire Democratic
From
Party
April to August 1991, Jay Rockefeller, as a potential presidential Democratic candidate, travels to several states, all the while meeting with strategists, pollsters, and political consultants who become convinced Jay Rockefeller can beat President Bush.
Good luck. I mean, he's done a lot for our state, and if he has a good chance at it, let him go for it.
I've always liked Governor Rockefeller, and he does a lot for the senior citizens.
He's really nice guy. I think he'd make a nice president.
They're looking for some good Democrats. I think he'd be a good Democrat, good pick.
But in the end, Rockefeller does not pursue it. Later that fall, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton declares his candidacy.
If you're a president, you're too high up, you're too far away. It's not natural. I was living a real life. And it was a life that I felt to me was important and potentially to others was important. I don't think my finest quality is being a CEO. I'm an advocate. I fight for things. I didn't have to aspire to climb that mountaintop because the mountaintops that I was climbing were very apparent to me, and I really liked it. I loved what I was doing.
The next year, Rockefeller works with the Bituminous Coal Operators Association and the United Mine Workers of America to come up with a plan to save the union's health and retirement funds, which were headed toward insolvency. Rockefeller authors a bill that successfully secures the promised lifetime benefits of retired coal miners. The Coal Industry Retiree Health Benefit Act of 1992 is commonly called the Coal Act and referred to by many of his colleagues as the Rockefeller Coal Act.
So many of them struggle with the black lung and broke down backs and knees and shoulders and every part of the body. He was relentless on making sure those coal miners were taken care of. He has a heart and a compassion for people that few people have. He just doesn't walk away.
I'll never forget on the Senate floor, the person, Bennett Johnson, who was head of the Energy Committee, which I was on, he didn't want this amendment. He didn't want it. I remember standing there, getting up, asking for recognition, and just telling him, I'm going to keep the Congress in session all during Christmas. This was just before Christmas. I'm going to do it. And I remember him turning around looking at me. And I had really hard eyes, unforgiving eyes. And he went along with it. Some people react, some people don't.
The Coal Act guarantees funding of health benefits for as many as 200,000 retired union coal miners and their widows and dependents.
So there was no strike, which is a hugely important thing for the country and for West Virginia in particular. And that law is still on the books. It still works. And people come up to me all the time to thank me. It's just what happens when you invest yourself into something. And in this case, I was protecting coal miners, most of them older. And I knew it was the right thing to do, and I have been proud of that ever since.
And he believes his great-grandfather, and most especially his grandfather, would be proud too, considering how far the great-grandson, with his work on behalf of coal miner families, has taken the Rockefeller legacy away from what's referred to as the Ludlow Massacre. 1914, Ludlow, Colorado. A miners' strike is underway at a coal mine owned by the Rockefeller family. Mine managers bring in National Guardsmen. A fire breaks out, and then a gun battle. When it's over, 24 people are dead, including 11 women and 2 children. This chapter of family history will influence years later Jay's father's work with laborers and the poor. But as it unfolds, the events profoundly change his grandfather, John D. Rockefeller Jr., who is ultimately responsible for all Rockefeller businesses at the time.
That tragedy, so horrible, and such inattention from the coal company to the people, to the miners, changed his life. I can't imagine what his feelings of guilt were, but my grandfather, who didn't even believe in dancing religiously as a strict Baptist, came to know them, he spent time with them, and he danced with them. And then what happened, Suzanne, was his epiphany.
After traveling to Colorado, Jay's grandfather works with his new head of industrial research, William Lyon Mackenzie King, to find ways to settle labor disputes peacefully and improve labor relations. At this time, Rockefeller Jr. also expands his philanthropic efforts, among them conserving natural landscapes and preserving historic landmarks. Jay's grandfather ultimately gives away more than $500 million.
And it was his way of entering into the world of public service. And I think Ludlow triggered that. He was rooted out of his comfort zone and had the right reaction because he was a good man. That had an effect on me.
It's the worst black mark on the Rockefeller family. Ludlow, 1914. Go ahead 70 years. And what is Jay Rockefeller doing in the Senate? He's promoting a bill to protect the health of miners, both in coal. But in one, it's a bad mark, and the other one, he's advocating for the coal miners of West Virginia. And I think that maybe there was a part of Jay that said, I know the burdens, and I'm going to use some of the blessings to be in a position of service where I'm going to work to make the Rockefeller name respectable. And that was a steep hill to climb.
Jay Rockefeller will go on to author the Miner Act of 2006, the most significant mine safety legislation in a generation. And in his final year in office, he'll see the adoption of policy that cuts in half the amount of permissible coal dust in underground mines, the same stricter standards Rockefeller had pushed for years, while addressing the resurgence of black lung disease. But because of his position on global warming, the senator will leave office knowing he has fallen out of favor with the coal industry.
It's not clean enough. And it is, accelerating our environmental problems. So the coal industry gets very angry at me. Coal miners do too, but I've spent my whole life fighting for coal miners. And so I take whatever I get, if it's criticism or whatever. But there's going to have to be clean coal. We're going to come to that point one way or another. Carbon capture and sequestration is something that I'm fixed on. It's hard for private companies, even utilities, to pay for that. The government has to get involved and increase spending for research. We have a wonderful national energy lab up in Morgantown. They're all over this. But you have to be willing to spend money on it, and nobody in Congress these days wants to spend money on anything. There's going to have to be clean coal. We're going to come to that point one way or another. It'll come. It'll come because it'll have to come.
As a member of the Senate Steel Caucus, Rockefeller works equally hard for the steel industry, work that includes arranging aid and protection for American steel workers.
I'm never so happy as when I'm in the middle of a steel workers brawl with somebody.
For veterans, Rockefeller leads the effort resulting in the official acknowledgement of Gulf War illness, which is now addressed with proper treatment. Years earlier, he authored legislation to assure ongoing delivery of affordable prescription drugs to veterans. He's also penned legislation to encourage the Veterans Administration to provide home health, daycare, respite, and hospice care.
We talk of courage, of sacrifice, of gratitude. But the fact of the matter is, the veterans have heard these words so many times. And I think what they're looking for is for us to be more like them, for us to live our lives with full meaning. We're going to have hearings, and we're going to do it until we pass the bill.
As chair of the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, Rockefeller sponsors legislation to establish an interoperable wireless network for first responders to communicate in emergencies.
All right, guys.
Rockefeller has remained an advocate for students of all ages through his support of science and technology.
He is the founding father of the E-rate program, a program that has helped connect schools and libraries to modern communications all across this country. When that program was started, only 14% of public schools were connected to the internet. Today, that number is north of 95%, and we're going to keep on moving on because the challenge is not just connection, it's broadband capacity. But I think it's pretty neat that in 1996, he had the foresight to say that connecting everyone to the internet was going to be important to education.
The internet could be the greatest thing that ever happened to America, and it could also be the destruction of America. If done by people who hate America, they could shut down Wall Street, they could shut down hospitals. We have to figure that out. And that's what we do in the intelligence community. We try to find them and stop them, and we do, a lot of them. Is there a way, in your mind, that
Rockefeller joined the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in 2001, chaired the committee from 2007 to 2009, and remained its vice chair until he retired from public office.
As a former chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and a member, Jay has been one of the most important, consistent, intelligent, and capable voices improving our nation's intelligence capabilities.
As chairman, Rockefeller sponsored legislation that reworked national intelligence operations following 9/11. It was controversial then and remains so today.
There's been a big controversy about the National Security Agency listening in on Americans. By a law which I got passed called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, you cannot listen to what's said on a telephone call, the NSA people. You cannot read an email. All you have is the fact that a telephone call was made to so-and-so, and then you track other telephone calls, and maybe this person talked to that person, who talked to this person, who talked to that person. All of a sudden you have the making, potentially, of a plot against America. So you have to do that. You have to do that. Keeping America safe is worth everything.
No one's ever going to know the real story of how big a part you played. No one has been more clear-eyed. No one has let out more of a clarion call over the last 6 to 8 years about the cyber threats we face and how we have to combat it than Jay Rockefeller. I promise you, you and America are a much safer nation because of Jay Rockefeller of West Virginia.
In January 2013, Jay Rockefeller announced he would not seek another term in the U.S. Senate. He addressed fellow members on the Senate floor for the last time December 4th, 2014.
This work demands and deserves nothing less than everything that we have to give. I will miss the Senate. Some days I don't want to leave, but it's time. I'm looking forward to the retirement. I mean, I don't like leaving the Senate because I hate leaving public policy. So my trick is, post-Senate, is to keep involved in public policy, but being able to spend more time being a grandparent, being a husband, being a father. And that's the price you pay in public service. You never get enough sleep, and you never have time for your own, and you never spend enough time with your children.
What would you like your legacy to be?
That I was an honorable and honest and hardworking public servant, and that everything I did was for the people. That's what got me up in the morning. That's what allowed me to sleep at night, even when I failed, which I often did. It's the fight that counts, and I love the fight.
Jay and Sharon Rockefeller quietly support a long list of philanthropic endeavors, both nationally and in West Virginia. Some of the most visible include the Blanchette Rockefeller Neurosciences Institute in Morgantown, dedicated to Alzheimer's research and named after Jay's mother, who lived with the disease for many years.
So now we're going to have a system of rehab programs.
Another significant gift by the Rockefellers helped make the Grace Ann Dorney Pulmonary Rehabilitation Center at Cabin Creek Health Systems in southern West Virginia a reality. The effort is named after the wife of journalist Ted Koppel.
When you see sincerity and when a man actually has it, it carries you a long way. He could have been anywhere, done anything. And he chose to give his life in service, and if spending 50 years doing that is not evidence of sincerity, I don't know what is.
In the final weeks of Jay Rockefeller's tenure in the U.S. Senate, West Virginia University President E. Gordon Gee announced that WVU will serve as the forever home of the John D. Rockefeller IV Senatorial Archives, Gallery, and School of Policy and Politics.
The establishment of the Rockefeller School of Policy and Politics will enable West Virginia University to have a much greater impact on policy development and implementation at local, state, national, and international levels. It will also provide improved academic and experiential opportunities for our students and for our faculty.
I was in complete awe.
Among those honoring Rockefeller at WVU, student Stephen Scott, who served as an intern on the senator's staff in the summer of 2014.
I know West Virginians, like myself, will dearly miss Senator Rockefeller and his countless contributions to the state. When I left the office on August 1st, I knew I was not only saying goodbye to the time I spent in D.C., but I was saying goodbye to one of the last times anyone will be able to visit Senator Rockefeller in his office. I was too saying goodbye to a West Virginian who I had recently just met, but has always had my best interests at heart my entire life. We appreciate you dearly, and we will miss you greatly. Thank you.
People can serve in many, many different ways.
And maybe his elected career is over, but that doesn't mean in any way that his dedication or commitment to West Virginia is any the less.
Well, thank you, Senator, for coming out.
Public service is basically about helping other people, and maybe other people who aren't just like you. I don't know of anything more honorable, more satisfying than helping people. But being in public life, being elected to public life, having people measure you measuring yourself in a state which was new to me back in 1964 and gradually accepted me, has been the highest honor of my life. I've loved it. I've absolutely loved it.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting,